In this video, I'm going to share with you 5 scenarios on how can you sell yourself better in job interviews. First scenario I'd like to talk about here would be conflict. So speaking about conflict is something that will inevitably pop up in most interviews with high-performing companies, right? And what happens here is that most candidates would prefer an approach in which they would picture themselves as someone who's really likable and easygoing candidate. Okay, this type of answer will not disqualify you from the job, but a better way to answer such questions around conflict would be to talk about a real life scenario which actually happened, and real life use cases for conflicts are never perfect. Sometimes it's about making it work versus you being someone likable. Right? To give a number of examples here, maybe someone on your team did not like you, but you still managed to get their input and eventually win the bid, right, for a sales role. Or maybe you had a colleague who isn't particularly easy to work with, but you appreciated he was a brilliant guy when it came to troubleshooting some bug you had no idea about how to solve, right? So it's a balancing act, and by focusing on some results you achieved, using your interpersonal skills to handle conflicts, that's how a superior scenario. Okay. Second scenario I like to talk about here is vague interview questions, something on the lines of how do you manage, okay, or how do you code, even for some of you. What happens here is that a vast majority of candidates would consider this a great opportunity for them to showcase their philosophy on managing or on coding and whatnot. This, will inevitably sound interesting to you because it's you coming up with the idea. However, for a skilled interviewer, it will be far more efficient if you would focus on a specific time when you managed something successfully, a clear example that showcases your proven expertise on the matter, all right? Even 3 examples of a time when you managed something successfully, and this could be all combinations, but my point is that vague answers, your philosophy of management is something you like versus specific achievements. This is what sells in job interviews. Okay. Now, there's also one notable exception here. How do you manage? You could also start by asking clarifying questions. And I know at Google this is quite a big trend, no problem about that. But the end goal would be still to talk about your achievement, to sell yourself on your achievements rather than your philosophy in a job interview. Okay. Third scenario I'd like to talk about here is that some candidates would get some biases while prepping for job interviews, the most common of which would be the ideal length of their answers. Okay, first bias would be to give short answers no longer than 2 minutes. Okay, and if you start qualifying the quality of your answers on their length, that is to not exceed 2 minutes, this will not really work to sell yourself best in a job interview, because I seriously doubt for instance, if you prepared your interview and you have a story bank of 20 or 25 stories, I doubt that you'll be able to cram every single story under 2 minutes, except maybe for some junior roles. And oftentimes, you will, by making your answer a bit lengthier, you will score more points because you will actually by speaking about your strength at length, you will more likely bias your interviewer towards you. Okay, this would be the short answer bias. There's the other extreme, and you build a bias that you should give long, convincing first answers. Something that I advise, by the way, candidates to do in job interviews. However, if you go on rambling for 15 minutes straight in a job interview, you can imagine, that won't go well with any interviewer. So the advice that I'm giving it is in a context where you actually prepared your job interview. My bid is, as I just said, to sell yourself on your strength and to do it consistently for as long as you feel it makes sense to you. right? So I guess the solution here would be around the best length of your answer would be this is a very carefully balanced act between both how well you prepped your job interview and how the interview evolves. Okay, they might even cut you short. They consider that your answer is too long, but listening skills in this context do pay off, and this is how you sell yourself best in a job interview, on the length of a given answer, right? Scenario number 4, and this will be a very quick one. I won't insist because I'm already over communicating on this one. It's no surprise probably that AI rewarded answers or AI invented stories will sound better than your own stories. Okay. However, in a real interview setting, I can tell you from my own experience as being an interview coach, it's a matter of minutes until I spot you're telling me an AI rewarded answer or an invented story, and that's when I lose all my interest in you as a candidate. This happens also in a real life interview, okay? And number 5, last but definitely not least, star answers, okay, so answers in the star format versus most interesting answers that sell best. Okay, so what you should understand is that I'm not recommending you to not use the star answer, but rather to understand that the star answer is a template, a mold that was designed by employers so they can screen candidates more easily. Okay, to some junior roles in particular, this is to your advantage because you have an API between you and your employer, and so long you can fit into that API, that's going to be to your advantage. Okay, now what happens is that expectations in job interviews and in high-performing companies is you go a little bit beyond that star answer, right? And maybe a quick note on how you prepare interviews. You generally prepare a story bank and then you revise your story bank, either role-playing, either just by yourself. But the point is that when you have a story bank, some of you will even have that story bank in the star format. And when you do a revision or two, you realize there's far more than the star format to make your answer more compelling. Things such as adding a few metrics, maybe make it a bit more dramatic, maybe talking about few learnings, maybe adding a bit of an introduction. There's plenty of ways you could go around this, but my point is that getting your answers in the star format is not a destination, but rather a first step through the journey of improving how your answers sound and how your answers sell in a job interview. So I hope you found this useful, and thank you very much for watching.